Okay, now I think I'm all set. So let's start. The first thing I want to do is just do a little bit of a review on kind of some of the basic fundamentals to racing into ACC, and more specifically, how we go about learning to race and get faster in ACC. Okay, because that's going to lead me to what I really want to talk to you about tonight. And
Cool.
the first thing I want to bring up as a term, and Schmitty and I have talked a lot about some of this stuff, but I think eventually we'll get to some new things for you too, Schmitty. But the first thing that we all have to do as drivers is we have to make compromises and choices. Okay. The kind of general type of compromise that we all have to make is where we place our car. Okay. And we will make compromises on every corner, but it's very obvious when you start talking about dependent sequences of corners, like these two corners right here, right? So we come out of these two tight corners here at Misano, and this second one, we have a choice that we can either pick up the throttle and make a lot of time coming through here, and it's going to put us wide on our exit, right? Which is going to compromise the entry for this corner right here. Or we can, delay just a little bit, sacrifice a little bit in this corner so that we can come out tight and open up this corner in the process. Okay? So that's the first basic kind of compromise that we all make all of the time. But there is another set of compromises that we also make, and that is related to the technique that we choose to use, or depending on your level, what you're capable of using. Okay, so we're all trying to get faster, and in a perfect world, let's say we were taking this corner right here. Just use it as a singular example. In a perfect world, what we're all trying to do is we want to come into the braking zone as fast as possible. We want to brake in a manner that we lose as little speed and time as possible on the brakes. We want to be as close of an apex as we can so that we shorten the corner as much as possible, while also carrying as much speed as possible through that apex, because we don't want to slow down any more than we have to. And we also want to be able to get onto the throttle as quickly as possible so that we start regaining our speed as quickly as we can, right? It's not wrong to think about corners as nothing more than a speed bump that prevents you from going fast all of the time. And in the end, how you either choose to negotiate that corner or your skill allows you to negotiate that corner will determine how much time that speed bump costs you, right? So what we're going to talk about tonight primarily is technique and the choices that we make with respect to technique. And let me come up to, this is a decent corner right here, because it has a fairly long run up to it, which means it's a fairly heavy braking zone as well. So everybody think back to when you first started racing, particularly in ACC, because everything I talk about tonight is going to be limited to ACC specifically. But think back to when you were first beginning, right? When we all sucked. We didn't have any idea what we were doing. And we get on the track, and the first thing that we try to do in order to go faster is what? Brake later, right? Is there anybody who hasn't been through that where you've just tried to brake later and later and later to make time? Okay? And there is, I don't know, there's a bit of a problem with that it can haunt us for a very long time. And let me see if I can explain why that is. So if you think about the very, very best, the fastest drivers in ACC, And I'm talking, you know, the ones that are even faster than our top guys here in Division 1, right? When you think about what separates a fast guy from a really fast guy from a true alien, right? What the difference typically is the brakes. It's their ability to use the brakes so that they can negotiate that speed bump of a corner without slowing any more than they absolutely have to. Okay? And what I think happens is we have a tendency to initially, when we start attacking corners and we're just trying to brake later and later and later, we reach a point where we're like, well, shit, I'm braking as late as I can. Why am I still so much slower than everybody else? And then I think the next thing that comes in is probably two things very close in time in our experience level. One, we realize, no, look, I have to hit apexes. You know, I can't keep blowing past the corner like this. It's killing me every time I do. I'm just braking too late in order to make this corner. And so we kind of start making an adjustment. Maybe we start braking a little bit earlier. But the other thing we start realizing at that time is, oh, there's this thing called trail braking that I have to learn how to do too. Okay? Mm-hmm. And so we start adding those in, and suddenly we get to a point where it's like, okay, we've started braking at a fairly reasonable point. In other words, we're not braking all that early. We're still braking pretty late. I've added in trail braking, and I'm hitting apexes. And to a certain extent, all three of those things would be true for every single person here tonight. And yet, at the same time, there's a vast difference in how quickly we're able to get around the track, even though fundamentally we're all doing the same thing. That makes sense?
Yep.
Okay, and somebody's got some pretty good background going on that is pretty loud.
Oh, sorry, it must be me.
Let's see. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so there's two things that that I would say to that we all kind of find ourselves in that spot where we're fundamentally doing the same things, but somehow there are people who are doing it either differently or better than we are, and therefore they are going faster. But you reach a point where you're like, okay, but I don't understand what it is they're doing differently or how they're doing it better in order to achieve those lap times that they are, right? So whether you're, you know, D6 and you're trying to go as fast as somebody in D4, or D4 trying to go as fast as somebody in D2, or D2 trying to go as fast as somebody in D1, or if you're a D1 driver like me, you're trying to, you know, go as fast as the gold drivers, or to creep a little bit closer to the true alien times. You know, there's always this goalpost that we're chasing, and there's something we're doing that is lacking. Okay.
Yep.
And I think there are two reasons for that. Now, one of those is that despite all of the information and tutorials and online lessons that you'll find on YouTube or where else, you know, that talk about, for instance, trail braking, okay? There is a vast difference between how, say, a D3 driver trail brakes and how a D1 gold or a true alien trail brakes. And the thing that I think that none of those, I don't know, tutorials or lessons talk about, at least I've never seen one that really addresses it, is look, there is this huge gap between you and these guys, and how do you get from here to there? Okay? I think that is an enormous gap in the, shall we say, sim racing educational system. And it is a topic that I have thought about consistently for probably 2 years. You know, how do you make that leap? You know, once you get past the sort of initial learning phase, you know, and you find yourself in, you know, D3, D4, D5, whatever the case is, right? How do you continue to get better when you don't even know what the difference really is? And you don't realize just how much better you have to be in order to get there, right? Because a lot of times we're not talking about a half a second. A lot of times we're talking 2 seconds or more on any given track. And it's like, well, wait, I'm trail braking. Why isn't that good enough? Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you about tonight from a technique standpoint is what I'm hoping is at least an initial solution to allow you to start understanding and closing that gap. Okay? The second thing that I want to bring up when I start talking about how that that initial kind of phase that we go through of trying to brake later, how that I think stays with us and holds us back to a certain extent, is this. So when I was talking about compromises, broadly speaking, you can think about technique as one of two characters. You can talk about a technique that tries to make their lap time on corner entry, or you can talk about a technique, a style, that is keyed off of maximizing corner exit. And what I think that initial mindset that we have a tendency to come in with, about braking as late as possible, is it has a tendency to lock us into trying to make our lap times on corner entry. Okay? Now, how we improve from there very much depends on the individual. Some people will be able to a certain extent, figure their way around that a little bit, and be able to get faster than someone else. Maybe it's because they're a little more talented, maybe they've spent more time practicing, and maybe they just think about this stuff a little bit and have just had an epiphany here and there that allow them to do it. But for the most part, they will still be approaching it from the initial mindset of trying to make their time on corner entry rather than corner exit. Okay? And where I think that holds us back is this. If your primary focus is always on making your time on corner entry, then I think the vast majority of sim racers, and I'm considering all of us just very average sim racers with no, natural talent. We just have to practice and work at it, but none of us go out there and just say, oh, fuck yeah, this is how Max Verstappen does it, and just pick it up. And there are people like that, right? We hate them all. But those of us who are just of average talent, we really have to work our way through the whole process. Some people will do it to better or greater effect. And the problem with always kind of sticking with that mindset of I have to make my time on corner entry is you will never learn, for an average person, you will never learn just how good you have to be on trail braking. So what will you miss out on? I'm going to show you some of the common errors here in a minute from the laps you guys provided me. But I would say there are two things that you will never truly be able to master unless you just one day have some kind of epiphany, okay? One is that you do not realize how much you have to use the brakes, and specifically trail braking, in order to rotate the car. It's far more complex and difficult to learn than any trail braking tutorial will ever even attempt to explain. They'll mention rotation, but they won't address just how good you have to be at rotating the car with the brakes. Second thing that I don't think you'll ever be able to learn is you will not be able to learn how much nuance is required when you are using your brakes. Because it's not just about slowing the car, and it's not just about rotating the car. It's also about balancing the car while you were doing those two things at the same time. Because the more balanced your car is, the more balanced your grip is. The more grip you have, more speed you can carry. So you have to go from thinking of basic trail braking as, what I think is the tendency of a little bit slower drivers is. The tendency is to think of the brake first as how quickly can I get the car slowed in order to lose as much time as possible on the brakes. And then once you start putting trail braking into it, you'll probably add into your thought process, okay, this is going to help me initially turn the car into the corner. But I think that's where the thought process has a tendency to stifle. And the first part of that, where you believe that the primary purpose of the brake is to slow the car as quickly as possible, is always leading your thought process. And that's what I mean when I say that this process that we all start with has a tendency to haunt us long after we have, developed a little bit of skill. Okay? So I think there are symptoms of that. In other words, I think I can look at your guys' laps and find a good indication of that is exactly what's happening. Okay, so I want to start by showing you some of those, just so that you have an idea what I'm talking about with respect to your own laps. And who should we start with? Let's see. Oh, no, there's a. Oh, yeah, Elliot, I love yours.
Uh-oh.
Yes. Thank you, Jesus.
You get to be the guinea pig. Let's see. You're driving the Lambo. And turn 1 on every one of your laps will give it away. Nice width, right? It's a good line. You start trail braking, you hit the apex. What's wrong with that? Right? That all looks perfectly fine. There's nothing to be ashamed about there. And that's what I'm talking about, where it's like you're doing all the fundamentals right, so why so slow, relatively speaking, to everybody else? And what I want you to watch now is your steering wheel. And watch how late you turn the steering wheel, okay? You've got a little bit there, but you're waiting right until the apex before you put the steering lock on, and you're hauled all the way over. You are completely exited from the corner, but it takes you this long to get back on the gas. Why?
Yeah.
Because you can't. You have to wait for the car to rotate. So when I talk about rotation, this is what I mean. There's very little rotation happening in the car right now. All of your rotation comes right as you get up to the apex. Even though you have trail braking on, the car just isn't turning that much right then. Why? Because you're putting too much pressure on it all at one time. You're asking it to do too much, too quickly, and all at the same time. Okay? Now, keep in mind that steering angle, right? And let me show you by... Where's my quali? I'm going to take pretty much the same line, same braking point. Now, watch how much more my steering wheel gets turned early in the corner, and how much less I have to use as a result at the apex.
Yep.
You see what I mean?
Yep.
So where you hit the apex and you have to have it hauled over completely, I get to stop right there, and I'm bam, straight back on the throttle. Why? Because I got more rotation done early. Okay, and that has a lot more to do with the brakes than it does with the steering wheel. And that's nothing more than because I've spent the time to learn how to control the rotation with the brakes, I'm able to execute that as a technique. Okay, so anytime you see someone doing that at any given corner, you know, where they hit the corner and they've just got way too much steering input at the apex and they have to delay the throttle in order to get back on it, that's a good indication that there's a lot of room to grow with respect to trail braking.
So was he just going too fast, and he was?
Yeah, it's more
his
than that.
inputs were too aggressive.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
more
that's
than
the
that.
part.
It starts
Yeah.
it starts with a thought process more than anything else. And there you are, Schmitty.
Damn it.
Yeah. Okay, so turn 1 at Nürburgring. This is another classic example of someone who has room to grow with respect to their trail braking. And let me take the speed down here. Okay, you're on the brakes, right? And
Yeah.
relatively speaking, nowhere near the left side of the track. Instead, you're going to have a completely straight wheel for as long as you can, and the car is edging toward the interior the entire time. Okay? And it's not until you get to right here that you start coming off the brakes. Okay, why is that? Because your mindset is, I have to, shorten my braking zone as much as possible. And if you are not comfortable enough with trail braking, that will naturally force you into a line that puts you straight line braking instead of trail braking. Right?
Yep.
So it's a symptom. That's all I'm saying. That's what these are symptoms. Let's see who. Before I forget, Robert, I'm not going to show your video, but I want to explain why. Anybody who's ever watched Robert's streams or anything, Robert uses one of the I don't know which one it is, but one of the apps, right, Robert, in order to show your.
Yes, I use ACC Drive.
Yeah. So super handy for some things. The problem is that there's a little bit of a delay in it scrolling across the screen, and makes it much more difficult to view real time exactly what's happening. I think it's great for analyzing laps afterwards in a way, when you know what you're doing, but I don't think it's good for a viewer. And I say that in order to say that I was uncomfortable giving you any really specific information because I just didn't feel comfortable reading that data on yours. Okay. The one thing that I will say, and this is an important point though, is that, and I just want you to keep these terms in mind for when I get to a couple of other videos I want to show you, is that what I noticed was that there was a high degree of linearity to your inputs, to both your throttle and your brake. There was a lot of linearity and not a lot of nuance. Okay? Nuance is when you start getting really good at trail braking, you will begin to understand what I mean when I say that there has to be nuance in your trail braking. Linearity will serve you very well up to a certain point, and then it stops serving you anymore. And I kind of think that's where you're at right now, Robert. Okay?
No, yeah, I've seen that on myself as well.
Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Like
good.
my braking and my accelerating is all straight lines.
Yeah, yeah. It's not completely.
Like I don't hold on to the brakes
Yeah.
as much as I should, or I get on the throttle way too fast.
Or too slow, in my opinion.
Or too, yeah, right.
You know, but the point is that it's gradual, right? And
Right.
that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about nuance. So you in particular, when I get to the two videos I'm going to show you guys at Laguna Seca, Robert, that's where I want you to really perk up, because I think it can give you a window to where you need to go next. Okay. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Okay. The next one I'm going to cover, Felix, Andre. This is both of you actually, but in slightly different ways. So I'm gonna, let's see, Felix, I'm gonna show yours first, and you were in the Audi. And I think I should be able to pick any lap of turns 6, 7, and 8. Okay. I am going to use the term defensive throttle when I describe this for you, Felix, and also for you, Andre. A lot of the times you will hear the term as maintenance throttle. I think that's a little bit misleading, and I'm not as much of a fan of the term here for our purposes, okay? Because I think there actually is a time and a place to use maintenance throttle, depending on the car you're driving, the track you're driving, in particular corners, okay? So, so if you ever hear anybody use the term maintenance throttle, be sure you understand exactly what it is they're talking about, because I don't necessarily think it's a good term for what we're talking about. So what I'm going to use instead is defensive throttle, okay? And generally where you'll see it is in a case like this, Felix, where you have a tendency to get on the throttle early, but it's not to speed the car up. It's to defensively keep yourself from turning into the apex too early. What do I mean by that? Why is that a symptom in this case? Because what it usually means is that you are not to a point yet where you can carry enough speed while trail braking in order to carry the trail braking far enough. So what you have a tendency to do is to overslow the car too early. And you have to get on the throttle defensively, because if you didn't, if you just stayed off the brakes and off the throttle, the car is going slow enough now that it would simply continue to rotate into the apex and do it too early. Okay? So watch this and see if see what I mean? Okay, so when I say defensive throttle, what I mean is that not only are you not going onto the throttle with the mindset that you're attacking the throttle, right? Which would be the aggressive, assertive means of going on the throttle. It's not just that. And I wouldn't say that it is maintenance throttle, because there are certain corners where you enter them and you cannot go full throttle or very close to full throttle right away, and you have no choice but to pick up just a little bit of speed or to maintain your speed for just a heartbeat or two before you're able to attack the throttle. That's true maintenance throttle, where the purpose of it is to maintain your speed while the car finishes its rotation. Okay. What you're doing it for is to prevent rotation, because if you didn't, you'd go right into the curb. Okay. And Andre, very similar, but it was really apparent there at turn 8, that hairpin. Let's see, and like me, you're an idiot who drives the Ferrari.
He loves a Ferrari.
I do too.
Only this year.
I like driving the damn thing. I know it's not a winner all the time, but I don't care. I like driving it.
I'm a Porsche driver, so I hate this car.
Okay. This is fun. You're going to love this one. Okay, so you're entering the corner. You have now gone onto the brakes, and look how deep you are into the corner when you get done with your brake. Done.
Yeah.
Barely entered it. Barely entered the corner yet. And I can promise you that it's not just that lap. So think about this in the context of what I was just telling Felix. You come off the brake, by right now. What happens if you don't throttle but you keep turning the wheel? You'll go straight into that inside curb.
I'm gonna go straight into the curb. Yeah.
Yep. So that's why I call this defensive throttle, right? Because there's a very specific reason you do it, and that is to defend yourself against over-rotating into that curb. Okay, and defensive throttle, you'll find it in a ton of different corners. That corner is a very classic example. Think about a couple of the, like turns, I want to say like 3 and 4 at Barcelona. Think about I forget the name of it, but in at Spa, the hairpin right before No Name Corner. These sort of largish hairpins are absolutely perfect candidates for that to rear its head. And give you an example. Let's see. Of generally speaking, something closer to what you're looking for. And it goes back to the idea of not being comfortable enough yet with trail braking in order to utilize it to its fullest. The reason you do that is because you haven't developed the skills yet in order to carry your trail braking deep enough into the corner so that when you attack the throttle, you have the car completely rotated and you can attack the throttle. It forces you into a defensive position, right? So same line that you're taking, but look how my inputs are different.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I see it now. Yeah.
Right? Huge difference, massive. And the only way you could accomplish that, something like that on a corner like this, is to spend enough time working on your trail braking so that you have the confidence to rotate the car on the brakes, right? That's really what I'm getting to. So whenever you guys see that defensive throttle in your in any of your laps, you know, that's a key. It's like, oh wait, there's a shitload more time there. I just have to get better on what I'm doing on the brakes in order to maximize it. Okay?
So
So
Sparky, are you braking later or just more trail braking into the corner?
most of the time, we didn't do a comparison to see who was exactly braking where, but most of the time, I think you'll probably find that I actually brake earlier. Let's see. But and probably not later than any of you. Where do I want to go? I want to go.
But you're letting that car rotate, and then you can nail the throttle instead
I'm not
of doing that.
And that's
Yeah.
sort of the mindset that I'm going to be encouraging you guys to get to, is that I am not waiting for the car to rotate. I am rotating the car. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So
yeah, that's a mistake that I have. Is I wait for the car to
Correct.
rotate and then get back on the.
correct. So let me go
Yeah.
back to that. Let's see, that idea that I was talking about.
And then
Because-
like you said, at the point when you're finally off the brakes completely, that's when you can attack
Correct.
and then get full throttle.
Correct. If you have the car rotated enough, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
If you have the car rotated enough. Okay, so let's talk about what I'm going to propose that you guys try. Because in my opinion, the only way that you can, you know, truly increase the level of your proficiency on trail braking is to practice it relentlessly. Okay? And to me, at least at our level, right, when we're still trying to work our way through that improvement and learning techniques and improving our skills, the only way to do that is to change what you do and put yourself into a position where you have no choice but to learn how to rotate the car with the brakes. Okay? And what I mean by that is this. To the extent your approach to driving fast and turning good lap times has been, I have to ensure that I make as much time as possible on entry, and then I'll just figure everything else out after that. That has to go away. And what you have to do, or what I'm suggesting that you do, is you change your approach completely backwards and say, no. My priority is to make as much time as I possibly can on the next straight. And whatever I need to do to the car, and therefore to my inputs, before that point is what I have to learn to do. Okay? So this is, in a way, it will be a complete reversal for some of you. But what does that mean? That means that if your priority is to maximize the subsequent straight, that means you must hit the apex, and as soon as you do, you must be able to attack the throttle. Period. Because if your priority is to maximize the straight and you can't maximize the throttle, you have failed. So you have to work backwards. This is my priority, which means I have to have the car right here, and not just here, but I have to have it pointed in an orientation that allows me to attack the throttle right here. Okay, if I'm going to get to this point that I want to be, how do I do it? Means I have to rotate the car more from here to here than I have previously done. That is where improving your technique comes in. And it's why I encourage this as a stylistic change, at least for the short term. in order to force yourself into the position where you have to learn this part right here. Because as soon as you do, that is when you start learning the nuance that I'm talking about when it comes to trail braking. Because you have to put yourself into positions that requires nuance. And with all the thought that I've given it, this is the only way I can think of for someone to do that, unless they just on their own have that sort of epiphany and say, oh, I've got to, make a change. Okay? Okay. The next thing I want to show you is what it looks like when we're talking about these two different styles, right? One style that attacks the entry and one style that attacks the exit. Because we were fortunate enough recently. Okay, so Danny Durance and Michael Griffith and myself did the 9 hours of Valencia. What was it, like 2 months ago, something along those lines. We drove the Porsche, and Griff did the setup on it. He is essentially the exact opposite from me as far as style goes. He attacks the entry, where I have a tendency to attack the exit, and more specifically, I made it a point to attack the exit at this race, because there are some tracks that lend themselves to that style better than others, right? So think this through for a minute. Let's say you change your style completely and you say, you know what? Okay, I'm going to buy into this for a while and I'm going to try it and I'm going to make it my priority to attack the exits. That means that's where you need to make your time, right? It means your priority is no longer to make time on the entry, it's to make time on the exit. You have to have grip in the back tires on the exit. You can't have the car sliding around underneath you when you exit, because you have to be able to put the power down either close to or at maximum throttle as soon as you hit the apex. And if the tires are spinning on you, you're now losing that time you worked so hard to gain. Okay? So that affects how you set the car up as well. If you're trying to make all of your time on entry under the brakes, there's a certain type of setup you would want for that. And as some of you have said, where you're just kind of waiting for the car to rotate, that means you depend on the setup of the car to give you that rotation mid-corner, which is a completely different setup than one that I might choose like I would here at Valencia, where I'm really trying to maximize exits, because I want to do all the rotation myself on the brakes. I don't want the car to over-rotate, because if it does, all that's going to do is put me in a position where it's sliding around all over me, which is exactly what I don't want on the exit. Okay? So there are absolutely differences, and they can both be very effective if you can execute one or the other very well. But what I want to show you is what those differences look like, so that when you go to try to execute this, you have an idea of what that difference actually represents on the track. Let's see, are we with Griff? Yeah, so we're with Griff first here, right? So I want to find his initial braking point first. Okay, so he broke essentially right on that white line that is right here, okay? And now me behind the wheel, and remember, this is the exact same car, same setup, everything. We'll find my braking point. What, 5, maybe as much as 10 meters before Griff did? Right? Because he's attacking the brakes. So it's critical for him to brake as late as he possibly can. Now, let's go up to the apex, and where I come off the brakes and go back onto the throttle. Okay, so right there, I finished the brakes and I'm going full throttle immediately. Okay, that's absolutely the representative of the style I'm talking about attacking the exit. Now look where my car is pointed, what the orientation of it is, because that's where we're talking about how much rotation have you accomplished by a certain point. If you look, my windshield wiper is right here, just starting on the orange part of the barrier. Okay. And now watch how Griff does the same thing. Okay, now he is off of the brake right there. This is the part where he is now waiting for the car to rotate on its own, right? Essentially the same position that I was in when I attacked the throttle. But he doesn't have as much rotation done. So he has to wait for the car to rotate independent of anything he does. And then watch how long it takes him to get on to full throttle. See the difference?
It's crazy.
Right? Now, let me be perfectly clear. There's virtually no difference in the lap times between Griff and I. We're very, very close on the lap times we turn, but with two completely different styles. The difference is he has been able to have that epiphany at some point, that says, okay, I've got to get better on my braking in order to incorporate this style, that I'm doing. He may not do it as much as I do, but he has incorporated it at least somewhat. Now, let me show you the last prong of this. So I'm going to stop right there where the nose of the car is just hiding the white portion of the curb there. And notice he's 120 kph at that point. And I'll be 124 or 125. I stopped it just a little bit late, I think. But exiting that corner, I would typically be about 4 kilometers per hour faster than he is. He broke about 5 to 10 meters later than I did, thereby making his lap time on entry. I broke earlier, rotated the car on the brake so that I was able to attack the throttle earlier, and I made my time on the exit. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, so you're both maintaining the speed either from entry or exit.
Yeah, and what I'm going to say is I'm going to give you a heads up right now that if you go to really practice this style, there's no question that at least early on, your apex speeds will likely suffer. Because it is one thing to learn how to rotate the car, like I'm suggesting you need to do, and then it's an entirely next step in order to learn how to rotate the car while maintaining a high apex speed. You will almost certainly, while you're learning to do this, overslow the car because it just takes time in order to learn that skill.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Now let's see. One other thing I want to show you. I want to take these stuff. Excuse me. I want to show you examples of the style that I am telling you about, taken to their most extreme example, and that's where we get to Laguna Seca. And Robert, this was what I was giving you a heads up on. So a couple of weeks ago, this is one of the, I think, Sunday. Jardier. I've got Jardier and I've got Niels. And this is where you're going to see the maximum impact of this style that I'm talking about, that when you get really, really good drivers who know how to execute this, and in particular on a track that is just dovetailed for it, which is what Laguna is. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find another track where you can just absolutely attack the throttle on every single corner because you're able to modulate the brakes in order to get it rotated on every single corner. It's got good grip. All of the corners are independent except for the the corkscrew, and even that, you're going to see them attack the throttle anyway. So this is what it looks like when really, really good drivers implement what I'm talking about at a track that it is really suited at. So what I want you to do is I want you to watch their brake and throttle inputs more than anything else. And one of the things I want you to look for is the nuance in the brakes. It is nothing they're thinking about in advance. All they are doing is reacting to the way the car feels, how the balance feels, and how the rotation feels. And what you'll see them doing is doing all of that rotation on the brakes and then absolutely attacking the throttle. Okay, so let's watch Jards first. You'll see that a lot where there's these little mid-corner dabs on the brakes, because they are carrying more speed in, so they need to rotate just a little bit more before the car is at the right orientation where they can attack the throttle. And Robert, this is what I talk about when you say that there are so many corners that they execute like this that when it comes to the brake are not linear at all.
Yep, that's it.
Okay, so every corner is executed differently with the brake, but you can tell that the approach, the mindset that they are going into with into each corner is absolutely identical, right? Rotate the corner on the brake and then attack the throttle. And now let's do Niels. And you'll notice one difference between them on the throttle. Niels has a tendency to go to 80% when he feels necessary, rather than going straight to 100%. And it may be that he is, where Jardier is waiting for all of the rotation to be completed on the brake, Niels is actually doing just the last degree or so of rotation on the throttle as opposed to the brake. It could also just be a bit of something he's got with the setup or whatever, but you can tell that there's just a slight difference in how they're executing it. But the fundamental idea is the same.
It's almost like a delay with Niles.
Yeah.
From what I'm seeing.
Yep, just
but
a little bit.
What's interesting between the two is that how Jardier can maintain on throttle entry, excuse me. As he's entering, he taps it, and then boom, he goes. But then Niles, he kind of waits for the car, and then he gradually into it, and then by the time he's out, he's full throttle. It's just like a
there's a couple of things I wanna mention as far as looking at their techniques that way that you have to be a little bit careful, because it's there is always difference at the high levels in exactly how they go about executing, right? My best guess with respect to Jards is that he is in fact rotating just a little bit more on the brakes than Niels is, and he has to be, I think, otherwise he could never attack the throttle that aggressively that often, right? Whereas I think Niels is just a little bit more, I don't know if patience the right word, but it might be maybe a little bit more methodical, I would say. Jards has a tendency to be a little bit bashy with his pedals, I would say, and you can see that when you see sometimes he'll have both brake and throttle inputs going at the same time, you know. I wouldn't say it's necessarily good technique, but it's something that makes sense to him, so he's able to execute it, right? Whereas Niels, in great Germanic fashion, is much more linear, to be honest, from this standpoint. So they are both essentially doing the same thing as far as their overall approach. They just execute it slightly different. And I would say Niels is probably coming off of the brake, say just a heartbeat before Jardier would, for instance, where there's another 1 to 2 degrees of rotation that still needs to be completed before you could truly attack the throttle at 100%. So what he does is he'll go to 80%, engage the differential, force the back end around just a little bit with the throttle itself. And then once that rotation is done, that's when he goes to full throttle.
Right.
So without talking to them, and really get an idea of what's going through their head, I can't tell you for sure. That's just my best guess under the circumstances. So that's everything I wanted to show you to give you the idea of what I'm talking about. In my opinion, if you guys want to give this a try, I think you should adopt it as a committed style, probably for at least a couple of weeks. It's possible that it's something you might just be able to practice, throw into your practice sessions and see how it goes. But I kind of think the tendency there is to fall back on what you know. So I think you're probably better off in the long run, at least, forcing yourself into the position where this is the way I'm going to do it, and that puts me in the classroom, so to speak, where I have no choice but to learn. Now, before you think, well, shit, that's going to make me really slow, let me give you a couple of advantages to it that beyond just being able to trail brake. One, as you can see just by looking at the difference between my lap and Griffith's lap, it's not necessarily a bad thing, even though it may make you slower on entry, right? So don't worry about that too much, and keep in mind that you're really doing this for the long-term effect more than anything else. Knowing that you're going to get better on the brakes as a result. 2, it's unbelievably consistent. Once you kind of get a feel for this, you're gonna find out that it is really consistent. And the reason it is that if you think about it, who was it? Elliot. So when I showed you that turn 1 entry stuff that you were doing, right? When you hit the apex based on just the style that you were driving, tell me if this makes sense to you. You still had a lot of work to do, and there was some unpredictability attached to exactly what the car was going to do and what you were going to have to do in response to it once you hit the apex.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was kind of turn and pray I don't lose it at the top
Right.
of that hill.
Right. It's one of the downsides of that style, right? Because if you think about it, you are highly dependent on hitting the brake marker which you have chosen. Because if you don't, then everything around the apex is now thrown off. Right? And that's what leads to the inconsistency. When you adopt this style that I'm talking about, where you're really focusing on rotating the car on the brakes and attacking the exit instead, all of the work you have to do is done by the time you hit the apex. Because when you start doing this, you leave yourself room for error. In other words, the reason you see the nuance on the brakes, where you see these inputs that are going up and down, or these late taps on them, is because is because you are feeling what the car is doing and making adjustments depending on what it does. And all of those adjustments that you decide you have to make are done by the time you hit the apex. That's why you're able to absolutely just attack the exit with the throttle once you learn how to do it. Now, okay, so that's why it's consistent, right? Because all of the work is done in the first half of the corner, and from the apex on, you don't have to think about anything. The second thing that makes it really, really good for that is that certainly as far as exit track limits go, they are no longer a concern. And the reason is because the first time that you run wide on an exit, you will realize, oh, I need another 2 degrees of rotation before I hit the throttle. And once you figure out what that orientation is, what that position is, you can hit it all the time. And you never have to worry about exit track limits again. You just won't get drive-throughs, to be honest with you. Unless it's Coda. Fuck Coda.
Yeah.
Because they have apex ones that are stupid.
That's right, F code.
Right. Okay, but I just want you to know that there are long-term advantages to learning how to do this that go beyond simply getting better at trail braking. It'll teach you a ton, in my opinion. But so that's my spiel, guys. Hit me with questions, or if you want to go out on track now and give it a try, happy to do that. What do you want to do from there?
So,
First of all, go ahead, Matt.
so do your, I mean, it's a whole new process, so.
Yeah.
So do your brake markers change, or you're just changing your inputs pretty much?
It's usually a combination of both, because when you first start doing this, you'll almost have to make your braking markers earlier, because you won't be good enough at trailing well enough to get the car pointed in the orientation you need it at the apex. If you try to do that now with your current brake markers, you're almost certainly just going to lose the back end.
That's what I was thinking. So
yeah. And from a setup standpoint, do not hesitate to do a couple of things to help yourself out. Lower the rake. Get that back end down, right? Give yourself a stable car. Move the brake bias forward, right? Anything you have to do. Okay, yeah, if you've been running Go setups where they almost always have negative rear camber or negative rear toe, chances are you're going to want to get rid of that. Because at this point, what you will want and need more than anything else is a stable car so that you can execute the rotation yourself. Eventually, as you get better, you can start going to a car that's more naturally loose, because you'll be able to control it better. But particularly when you first start learning how to do this, stabilize that bitch, as much as you need to, so that you can practice that nuance.
Okay. I'm excited. What about you guys?
That was some good comparisons. That helped a
That was
lot.
pretty good, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that was awesome, man. I mean, this is fantastic, John.
Well, no, I'm glad. At the very least, I hope it will give you something to think about, in order to move forward. But yeah, give it a try, guys, and we'll see how it goes, And I want to hear from you once you've had a chance to play with it, and just tell me what you think, And
We'll say it makes more sense because, like, in Champion Motorsports with like Mr. Sir and all those guys with you, and we use Popometer. I'm always wondering why they break so much sooner than I do. Like when you're looking at Popometer,
yeah,
you can tell that he's braking so much sooner. You're like, why is he braking so much earlier than me and faster?
yeah, and you know what it comes down to is generally they're doing that because look, if I brake that late, I'm never going to be able to keep the car balanced.
Right.
I'm never going to be able to feel what the car is doing in enough time to adjust properly to it. You know, that's where all the nuance comes in. You've got to be able to feel it and give yourself time to feel it and make adjustments where you need to, and still carry speed at the same time. So a lot of the times they'll brake earlier, but they won't brake as much.
Right, and they're on throttle obviously a lot quicker than
Yeah.
what I was doing too. And
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense now that you say it the way you've said it, is how they brake earlier and they're on throttle so much quicker. And the whole time they're gaining speed to what I'm doing.
Yeah. Most of the time, when you look at someone who is legitimately faster than you, most of the time you lose to them will be on the straights, because they'll just flat out beat you out of the corner. You know.
Oh yeah.
So I'm gonna go try to run a couple of laps. Really trying to execute this technique I'm talking about, so that you guys can see it yourself. But give me a
most
couple of laps,
definitely,
because it's been a while since I've really tried to do nothing but this technique.
So would you say, as we're trying to change our technique, would braking 10 to 15 meters before our usual braking point would be sufficient, or?
Could be, Felix. It'll depend a lot on the corner in question, you know, to be honest with you. But I think 10 meters is probably a pretty good starting point, you know, just to let yourself sort of ease into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say on this track, I forgot who did it at SRA, that coaching on Thursday.
Mhm.
I noticed turn 1 they were braking way before, like I was doing it right before the 50 on turn 1, and they were probably like at the 70 marker, and just taking more control into that first turn.
Yep.
I actually love this track.
I do too. It's one of my favorites.
I love Misano. Yeah.
It's such a
So,
good
John,
flowing track.
is the principle that you trail brake every corner?
At least for now, yes.
It's crazy when you start racing or sim racing, you're just like, I'm just racing, but now there's so much involved. I love it, but it's like so much information.
Yeah, and to me, this is the big gap in the sim racing education.
Oh, you would have died in the 488 if you tried that.
And
Southering that early.
nah, I drove it quite a bit too. You could do it in that too.
I just remember that turn on Xbox days. That used to just spin right out.
That's when Sparky was winning all of our races at BMR.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Sparky,
See,
you
for me,
try
I
to
can already
go ahead. Go ahead.
go.
No, I was gonna say, Sparky, you basically hold the brake up to the apex.
Yeah, when you're really focusing on this as a technique and a style, then yes, I think you should, because remember that the larger point here is to control the rotation with the brakes. That is what you're trying to learn. So the more you are able to rotate the car, the better. But that's why I say that initially, as you're learning it, your apex speeds will probably drop.
Right, because I'm gonna go in too slow into it because I'm trying to get there with the brake.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what you should have seen already is that there have been a couple of corners where I wound up too deep and missed the apex. And but the advantage of that is that it doesn't sacrifice my technique. In other words, I just rotated a little bit more. And then as soon as it's rotated, then I just do what I was planning to do anyway, which is attack the throttle.
Right.
Yeah, Robert, that's the same question I was gonna ask.
Okay.
Like if I showed you one of my practice laps, it wouldn't be this extreme as far as executing this technique, because as you get better, you start blending. To really maximize your times, you know. But I think to begin with, essentially what this lap looks like is what I think you should try to learn how to do. And kind of going back to your question, the reason I think you want to have a tendency to brake all the way up to the apex early on while you're learning this is because you don't want to get into the habit of allowing the car to rotate itself.
Right. Now, do you reach 100% braking when you initially start your trail braking?
That is highly dependent on the corner. And one of the things I will suggest is that do not hesitate to make changes to how your brakes are set up. In order to help you get better at this. Because keep in mind that at this point you're probably accustomed to relying very heavy on long, heavy applications of the brake, you know? Whereas when you do this, you're going to find that it's going to force you to, in some corners, not use 100% brake pressure, and in almost all corners, your trail braking phase is going to become longer than what you're accustomed to. It could very well be that however you have your hardware set up, or software if it comes with software, it could be that that current setup is not good for what you'll now be trying to do.
It's kind of like your when you used to do those deep dive videos, like your Silverstone, or you did a brake video. It was probably 6 months ago, where you did that Silverstone and Monza comparison on brakes, brake pressure, and like I used to brake 100% on Silverstone on turn 1, but you don't have to.
No, and shouldn't.
Yeah, no, yep, but that's just learning. And then once I saw your video and you could tell you didn't even put, 50% braking power because you kept your speed up.
Correct.
Yeah, as I'm watching these laps and I'm watching your throttle and brake inputs, like I can tell already for me, just like I cannot get on that acceleration as early as you do.
Right.
As I'm coming out, I'm like hesitating to do it. Then I'm on it.
And that's when the defensive acceleration comes in.
Right. I was about to say
Like-
that. Right.
It's like your brain is telling you you're gonna lose the car, so you put in the extra throttle to keep the rear end stable. You shouldn't do that.
Also, choosing the correct line also will help.
Yes.
Right.
Always. Always. Just
I see you using a lot of the track.
Yeah,
A
and you
lot.
have to. I mean, look, that's part of the recipe that goes to making great laps. If there are X number of ingredients to make that cake, using the entirety of the available track is one of the crucial ingredients. Period. Can't get around it. So
Right.
if you whenever you feel like it, don't hesitate to either go watch, like one of the D1 races, or watch Jardir or Niels or whoever their stream at certain tracks, and look exactly where they place the car, and compare that to where you're doing it on your replays. Because it's a critical factor. It's just not something you can get around. If you're not using the entirety of the track, you're going to be losing time because that's going to compromise your options at the corner you're trying to attack.
Yep.
What else, guys? Anything else, or do you think you have I fed you too much information already, and now you just want to go to bed?
I don't want to
No,
go to bed.
man,
I want to go race.
I want to try it. That's what I want to do.
I'm gonna try this. That's what I'm
Yeah.
doing.
Well, go ahead.
I gotta get rid of that handicap, that golf handicap.
I hear you. Okay.
No,
Well,
this is fantastic.
if you can't think of any other questions right now, I'll stop the stream here, and then you guys can just go run some laps, and I'll just watch you, and and we'll talk about it as you go.
Yep, that works.
Yeah,
Sound
sure.
good? Okay.
Appreciate it.
Ending the stream
Yeah,
then.
absolutely.
Go run some laps, boys.
Thanks again, John.